Good morning, I'm Reagan. Welcome to Dulles. I'm so glad that you are watching online with us this morning. So today we have an exciting communion message. So you have a couple minutes to grab any communion elements that you might have in your house. This could be wine, juice, crackers, or bread. So go ahead and grab those, and my dad will be on screen in a few minutes to lead us in communion. I'm so glad that you're with us. I hope you have a happy Sunday.
I know regularly we talk here at Dulles about a picture that Jesus gave us. Jesus gives us many, many pictures. He talked in parables, which is very story rich. People outside of faith will say that Jesus is one of the very best, if not the greatest teacher who ever lived. He is such a masterful storyteller. And of all the pictures he gave us, one that's particularly precious to us that we talk about regularly. And if you've been with us for a couple of years and you think, Brad, are you going to tell the story again about the table? Yes, that's very intentional. We do this on purpose so that we never forget this picture that has become a core value of ours. When Jesus is describing the Father's heart for you and me, his plan for you and me, he describes in great detail, particularly in Luke chapter 14, the picture or the scene, the scenario of a table. And there's a couple interesting things about this picture that he describes for us, that he paints for us. One is that the table, the invitation to the table wasn't an invitation to a big temple or some synagogue. It's not an invitation to join some kind of religious sect that's centered around strict rules. Jesus describes the Father's heart, an invitation to us, not as an invitation to a heaven that has white puffy clouds everywhere and little floating angels and golden musical instruments. I mean, that's such a silly picture that we've adopted in our culture about heaven when it's never described that way in Scripture. Jesus never referred to that. No, Jesus doesn't give us any of that. That's not the invitation that he's describing. When Jesus tells us the Father's heart for us, his plan for you and me, he tells us painstakingly, in great detail, he tells us of an invitation to a feast. And another thing that's remarkable to us and why we repeat this 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 times a year here at Dulles is that it's not religious people that are invited to the feast. It's not people who grew up in church and follow all the rules or have been considered clean. In fact, the context where Jesus tells the story in Luke 14 and 15, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, are upset that Jesus is inviting to an actual table, an actual feast, unclean people, religiously unclean people, people who the religious leaders thought were despised by God because of behavior or because of something in their life. And Jesus is saying, no, that's exactly who I came for. So here's the question about this picture that we talk about a lot, the picture that Jesus gave us of this feast, the feast that represents acceptance and friendship, particularly in first century Palestine, in Judea. I mean, when you invited someone to a dinner or to your home or to your table, especially to a feast that would last hours or days, it was the ultimate gesture of friendship, of saying you're now a part of our family. You're now a close friend. That's the picture that God gives us, that Jesus gives us of God's heart for us. The question now is, what next? When you say yes to this invitation, to this feast of fellowship and acceptance, well, what comes next? What do we do, or what are we to be about after we've said yes to our Father God's invitation? Now what? 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say maybe in the last 15 years, we've commonly heard that the American economy, Americans are the wealthiest people who've ever lived in history. You've probably read or heard that mantra now, in the last decade or two. And, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago when the stock market was just spiking really high, we heard it. We read articles regularly per capita. And, it's not just about the stock market. Some of this was unemployment was low. And of course, there's still poverty. And there was poverty over the last 15 years in our country. And there are challenging situations. And to this day, there's a homeless crisis on the West Coast. But this is a per capita average kind of thing, that the average American was worth more than any country's citizens in human history. And for those of us, particularly in the Washington, D.C. area, where this is one of the, if not the wealthiest region in the United States, there are some challenges associated with this. And the challenges that evolve in our country in this kind of affluence are things like wanting to cancel other people or feeling entitled. It's amazing to me, and maybe this sounds judgmental, and maybe it is. Maybe it's a rightful, where Jesus actually tells us it's right to judge circumstances and to protect our homes or our own core values from certain things that we see. That's not self-righteousness, but that is calling something what it is on face value. Maybe it's a right kind of judgment to say or refer to what we often hear in our area, where we have so much. We have so much in this area. I mean, regardless of what kind of home you live in or how long you've been working or out of college, I mean, you are among the wealthiest people, not just in the world, but who've ever lived. And how correct it is to call out in ourselves the ease by which we sometimes complain, or we start comparing our home to someone else's house, or what we don't have, or how we don't get to travel the way someone else does. Or it's amazing how quickly we can have so much, and yet all we can see is the financial challenge that we're in right now, or what so many people around us seem to have that we don't have. And if you are focused primarily on how tight things are financially, that's very real. Amy and I know that experience. Of course we do. But it bears reminding that a lot of cultures around the world would simply look at the house you live in and say you are one of the richest people who've ever lived. It's amazing how there's something in our broken wiring that moves quickly from appreciation or recognizing what we have or what we've been given to what we don't have, or the challenges that are in our lives, or what somebody else has that we don't have. When our girls when they became teenagers, especially at 14, 15, 16 years old, there was a pretty popular show on MTV that Amy and I just thought was ridiculous. I don't think we ever watched the whole episode, but we watched enough from time to time to just sort of say, oh my gosh, we'll never allow, and it was called My Super Sweet 16. And I can't believe in a communion message I'm even referring to this, but this was a reality show that followed very wealthy families whose 15-year-old daughters were planning like their own, or demanding their own big posh 16-year-old birthday parties. And these things are so elaborate. And Amy and I guess it sounds judgmental. I don't know. We're not intending to judge any particular person. It was just so over the top. And there were times we just felt disgusted and like, man, what do we need to do to protect in our own home and our own family from this? But I'm generalizing here. I'm not remembering a specific scene that I watched years ago. But, something like a girl has 100 or 200 students from high school at their big party, their 16-year-old birthday party, their Sweet 16. And the girl sees 2 or 3 freshmen that she didn't invite or want invited, and she gets so upset that they're there. Why are they here? I don't want them with my older friends. And she would call security and get them kicked out while cussing and making a huge scene. And that's such an extreme example. I know that's more on the outlier spectrum of examples of entitlement, or just how quickly somebody can look at their life and lose total perspective. But I want to ask you, what is it in all of us that cringes when we hear an example like that or we see a scene like that? And again, I don't think it's judgmental to say that's entitled or that person's spoiled. I think it's just common sense. And it's so easy to recognize this in someone else. And it's so much harder to see it in your own home or in your own heart or your own perspective. I think we struggle with blindness when it comes to, am I entitled? Or do I easily complain? Or do I quickly shift to what I don't have? It's easier to see this in someone else. I think the reason we cringe, or maybe even we get a little angry at examples like this, especially when we're thinking about someone else or we see someone else do this, is because we know, our instinct knows, we have this innate sense of reality that knows that there's a lot of pain in our world. And there's a lot of hurt, and we've all faced hurt and challenges, especially maybe 15 or 16-year-olds. Some don't recognize pain or hurt in their lives yet, but it's the human condition that not only have we experienced hurt or challenges, we've created challenges and we've created hurt. And there's this inner awareness, whether we're conscious of it from day to day or not, there's an awareness, this innate understanding that the human condition is broken. And there's something about gratitude that rightly expresses that there's something in my life that I don't deserve. There's an experience, there's a level or degree of good that I've been given, and I don't deserve it. And when we hear that, we don't cringe, we gravitate toward it. We love movies that end this way. We love redemptive stories where someone who is a villain, a celebrity, or an athlete, and they have this humbling experience, and then they express gratitude or humility. We love that. Those are redemption stories, and we'll watch them 100 times because there's something that draws us to a person who expresses the reality that we know, that none of us deserve the good or the degree of good that we've experienced in our lives. And it's so easy to think, well, maybe I do deserve some of it. I'm smart, or I work hard at my job, or I think I've earned what I have in my life. And that's a slippery slope. I think there's blindness in that, because ultimately God gives you your intellect, and God gave you the family that helped you go to college or get the education, or your ability to communicate a certain way. Ultimately goes back to the way God has gifted us. And there's something about gratitude. There's something about giving thanks that's beautiful. We all find it attractive because it speaks to the reality that we're all somehow aware of. There's good in my life that I don't deserve. We have things in this life that we simply don't deserve. Paul says in Romans 5, this is just one simple verse, but man, is this a powerful verse that Paul writes as he's communicating God's heart. But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died, and the many meaning all people, all humans, if the many died by the trespass of one man, meaning the first humans, Adam and Eve, for if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Mackenzie just had a little anniversary last week of when she left home to go to Disney World. She had the opportunity, and she has communicated gratitude so many times for this opportunity to God and to her friends, and just the opportunity to do this. She went as part of the Disney World internship for almost a year, it was about 9 months. And she left 5 years ago last week. And we were just talking recently about how sweet the end of her program was. And one of my memories, I was just really blown away and so thankful, was that a lot of her coworkers threw her like a going away dinner when her program was over. And she was about to move back home to Virginia. And there were gifts, and they even built up the anticipation. They were kind of hinting about it for a week or so. And it was just sweet. And it's easy to think, when we look at what Paul says and we look at what grace is, it's easy to see a scene like that or experience something like that and think that's grace. It's actually not grace. It was an amazing dinner party. There was fun. There was build up to it. There were presents. There were things said to Mackenzie by people in their 70s. A lot of Mackenzie's closest friends there were actually older, who she still visits when she goes back to Florida. A lot of sweet things that were said. But this is not an example of grace. Yes, it was a gift. And yes, there was joy. And there were all these good things that made Mackenzie just weepy when she left. Eating together and celebrating and some nice little presents. But as good as we feel about those moments, it's actually not an example of what grace is. That's not grace. If you earned it, or maybe you never would have asked for it, or you didn't think you deserved it. Maybe it was just the way you treated people at work, or they thought somehow you were deserving of this. If your actions or heart or friendship somehow earned or deserved a going away party or a nice dinner, it is at that point no longer grace. Grace is a gift, always undeserved, where maybe some kind of punishment or consequence is deserved. That's when grace shows up. Grace is offered or expressed, is given when we're undeserving of something good. Grace is a gift, always undeserved by the recipient, and always costs some sort of price or sacrifice by the giver. I want to read just straight from my notes here. And the moment you recognize that the invitation to God's table came to you when you were lost, when your attitude was selfish, when you were really wired, or your propensity was towards self-serving or elevating yourself, when God's invitation to his table came when you were broken, that is the moment that you recognize that God invites you not because you earned it, not because you were born into a certain family or you grew up religious or going to church. He invites you to his table because he loves you. You're his child. It's not because you deserve it. And this is the first thing that happens after you arrive at God's table. You know, this is not really a feast here today. These are symbols. Not only does it symbolize the feast that Jesus had with his disciples the night before his crucifixion, the Passover meal, and that was a feast that would last for hours, and the wine was plentiful, and the food was always plentiful. And this is symbolic of that. But specifically, when Jesus took the loaves of bread and he took the bottles or jars of wine and he broke the bread and he poured the wine for all the disciples, and he said to all of his followers, "Do this in remembrance of me. Never stop doing this until I return one day." And we eat and drink at the feast together. Don't ever stop doing this. It was symbolic of Jesus' body that would be broken the very next day after the Passover meal. His blood that would be spilled to take our place of brokenness, where you and I were locked into this place of selfishness or self-serving. Not always a bad person, maybe not even a bad person, generally good people. But Jesus didn't come to make bad people good people. Jesus came for good people who are broken, who are incomplete and not whole, and who are trapped by or stuck in selfishness or self-serving or not looking at others the way that he designed you and me originally to look at others, to live our lives elevating others. In our broken state, we tend to think about ourselves and protect ourselves and serve ourselves. And Jesus came to fix that and to right it and to free you and me from such a lower level, a broken level of living. In fact, he calls it lostness. Jesus came to find you and me and to welcome us to his table, to rescue us from ourselves. And the answer to what happens once you say yes to the table is that the table is designed for you and I not to become complacent or not to take it for granted or to start complaining about those who are at the table or wishing somebody's attitude at the table was different. The table is designed in such a way where you and I continue to live in and breathe into us gratitude for Jesus inviting someone who didn't deserve it. We did not deserve this VIP invitation to his feast, and yet he made a seat for you and made a seat for me. You and I live more fully and remain open to the reality of God when we say yes, not only to the bread and wine, but we remain grateful and thankful. So with the bread and with the juice, I invite you simply but powerfully to live in gratitude at the table of Jesus by saying, Jesus, you told us to do this in remembrance of you. We don't just remember what you did in history a long time ago. We remember our own brokenness. We remember how stuck we were in not being able to change ourselves. And we remember how you became our brokenness. You became our limitations. You became our weaknesses. And we remember how you became whole in your resurrection from the dead. And you offer not just to take our brokenness from us, but to fill us with your wholeness. So Jesus, we say yes, and we say thank you. Let's eat together. And Jesus, not only do we say yes to your spilled blood, your innocent blood that was spilled on the cross for me, for us, we say thank you for giving us what we do not deserve. Let's drink together. We're humbled by your remarkable love, your actual grace, your gift given to us when we did not deserve to sit at your feast of friendship and acceptance. Just want to challenge you, if you don't walk regularly in gratitude, practice this week. Start tonight. End every day thankful for something God is developing in you, something God is growing and maturing in you, something that God is making new in you. Let's try this week. Every single day, let's try to express gratitude. Shift our focus from what we don't have or what's missing or the stress or the financial challenge. Let's focus primarily on what Jesus is making new and developing in us. It's just going to continue to open a whole world of new and beauty as we love others the way Jesus has loved us. I'm speaking next week. I'm looking forward to it already. I love you, and I love that you're part of our church family.